Hello, guys. Welcome to the Taco Truck Podcast. My name is Nick, and I am joined by my three friends, George, Anthony,
Hello?
and Andy. Uh,
What's up?
this podcast will be about the Hispanic community and about mainly talking about many issues within the Hispanic world, including in Mexico, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Colombia, Spain, what have you. We'll cover the news.
Brought to
Um,
you, brought to you in the most funniest and realest way possible.
Yes. We are not professional podcasters, obviously. We are just four ordinary guys who love to talk about this stuff every night. And we thought, hey, might as well broadcast this to the world. So,
And just to
anyways,
make it uh,
let's start with
short,
some ideas, right? What's the f- what's the first idea we should talk about?
well, I think we
Personally,
should
I
just.
feel I feel that we should talk about the migrant crisis because right now
Yes, the
it's kind
migrant
of going
crisis.
unheard.
So, yes, there's we have a I've gone through a variety of political viewpoints in my life. Um, I myself, obviously, we're not very well known, but I myself, I'm a Mexican American. I come from a family of immigrants who I'm actually second generation Mexican American, born in the U.S.
I
So
think it's safe to say that we're all half breeds here. There's no denying that.
in a way, yes. So I've seen it firsthand, but I've also seen firsthand, more right wing viewpoints because I grew up in a Republican area, in a blue state, but in a Republican area. I'm actually from California, lovely state of California. Um,
Very lovely.
Very lovely, exactly. Oh, we'll get into that too, I promise. How lovely this state really is.
Actually, California is pretty good. I mean,
I'm
we
sure
got
it
our
is.
issues, but
Yeah. I mean, yeah,
California,
Basic,
like honestly, objectively, good place to live.
it's the best
yeah,
place where I can go into the bathroom everywhere, anywhere. Right next to
Whoa.
India.
Okay.
Yeah, dude, it's so nice, dude. I could just shit on the street. Like
exactly.
I love doing that all the time. It's the best.
Exactly. Shitting on the street, shitting in the bushes.
All right,
Yes.
Shitting
so
on the Hollywood sign.
what about the migrant crisis? You just like what? You don't like all of them come over here or what?
Not
No, it's not necessarily that. I think here's the thing, right? So from our perspective, I would say I'm gonna say for the most part, besides you, Andy, our interest is um, we take more of a collective interest in the affairs of Hispanic Americans. So in a sense, it would never be from that angle. We would never
No, no,
say,
no,
"Oh,
no.
we don't want them
Of
there."
course.
It's just
I
we
wasn't
want
accusing
we
it
care
from
for
like
their
that.
general welfare. I think we could say that.
but we
Yeah, of
got to
course.
look into the reasons why they immigrate.
And I think part of the reasons there's two viewpoints on this that I think are both wrong. The
Mhm.
first viewpoint is that people think, this is mainly Americans who believe that um, when Hispanics come to this country, that it means, oh well, we're enriching the country, and uh, it's simply all going to be beneficial. It's all going to be all right. And then you have the other side that's going to be like, no, they shouldn't come here. They should stay where they're at. Both are equally wrong because it's kind of like saying, well, if an ethnically homogenous country receives, uh, like, I'll say a large amount of immigrants from another country, especially when one is more economically unstable, that's kind of like saying, oh, well, you guys are kind of disenfranchised from coming into our country just on the simple basis that your country is not doing well. So come back when your country is doing well. Whilst at the same time, that same country that doesn't want to welcome you guys in is still putting in place policies where essentially that country cannot thrive on its own.
Yeah, I agree.
Definitely.
I
I
But
think
I think go
the
ahead, Nick.
U.S. has had to do a lot with the status of our countries as Hispanics, the status of our countries,
Well,
and
yeah,
not
no, and
the
Nick,
U.S.
you
has
you are
put
right
itself
about that. But go
the
on, go
U.S.
on.
has put itself in a leading role of these countries, which we may or may not disagree with. We have varying viewpoints on that, and you guys will see that later on.
Now,
Um,
I'm of the firm opinion that on Catholic principle, we should have help our fellow Catholics from whatever tribulations they're going through. And even what's going on, I will not shun them from trying to live out or eke out something close to a standard of living in which they can't find. Now, on how and why this is happening in the country, that could be many reasons. Main reasons why, of course, crime and civil wars. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to who is causing them.
Exactly.
I
Mexican,
think
also, listen, Marcus, let me ask you this. Like, just for the viewers here, like, explain exactly, like, a little in deep detail what exactly you mean by that.
Yeah. Of course, we have heard recently from the news that how Senator Lindsey Graham accused Mexico of being a narco state, and AMLO fired back saying that the U.S. is basically fueling that narco state, basically that the U.S. citizens are buying the drugs, and that could just be extended to Central America as well. Why are there gangs? There's a market. Of course, there's going to be someone there to try to carve out a chunk. That's where you have like MS-13. They were created to uh, peddle and sell drugs to the buyers.
Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
I think there's blame on both sides. You can't really blame it on one or the other because supply and demand is a two-way street. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Exactly. And keep in mind, the MS-13 was a gang uh, founded here. It was founded by Hispanics, yes, but it was founded here in the United States. It was founded on the streets of Los Angeles.
Well, technically,
Yeah.
it was founded in El Salvador during the Civil War, which I will get to on why those civil wars happened. It was founded in El Salvador, and when the crisis of the first ever actual migrant crisis that and living memory was when El Salvadorians were coming to the U.S. because they were fleeing from the death squads, the guerrillas, and this is why I get to the other reason why political instability, as we always know, as we all know, the U.S. has its hand in all of the pies and political instability in Latin America, from the occupations of Haiti, Dominican Republic, to all the way to the Cold War of Operation Condor, as we may know, at least I hope you all know, in which the CIA, which we will talk about way more to our listeners, they have always played a role in destabilizing all of those Latin American nations. And that's the case in Central America, in which they would destabilize Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and finally enough, not to a large extent, Panama with Noriega, or as he's more affectionately known,
Exactly.
Pineapple Face. And
you
yes,
know,
he was called Pineapple Face
you know,
because
I, I
of his
think the for the longest time, Latin American countries have always been puppets of either the West or the East,
East.
whether that be China, whether that be the Soviet Union, whether that be whoever.
Yeah.
Each Latin American country has always just had to choose a side. There has never been a true third way. The last real third way was the Spanish Empire, in my
No,
opinion.
I wouldn't say it wasn't the. I guess we talk about this right now. Is the other third way was, of course, Francoism. Was
Francoism
Francoism?
as well, but that never really went into Latin America too much.
Well,
So
I think when you're saying the third way was Spanish Empire, I mean the U.S. or the East weren't really a big power when the Empire was a power.
the
I don't
British
think that's
Empire
really.
was.
Well, this is.
Yeah,
I
that's
agree.
fair. I mean, even then, like when the British power was at its height, the Spanish Empire was already declined. So I
This
think
is
they're
what that.
not really contemporary.
I agree with Andy. That's what I'm saying. Francoism in the more in modern term, during the Cold War, it was actually a semi third way that was being Francoism. In fact, actually, here's the funny thing: Castro, even before he became the socialist we all know and frankly loathe, he agreed with many of the ideas of Franco, of nationalism and union, Pan-Hispanism. Of course, this never went anywhere because he went full left wing. However, there always was.
Keep in mind, we're just describing Franco as another third way. Uh, Obviously, we're not supporting
At least
every
not
single
openly.
thing, every single aspect of fascism, but
Well, I think
No,
when you say Francoism's a third way, I mean a lot of Latin American countries did become nationalists and dictatorships, kind of in the same style that Franco did in that
Well,
same
a
time
lot of
period
them were
too.
pro-American or pro-Soviet, though. For example, Pinochet was extremely
That's true.
pro-American.
Yeah, that's
Pinochet
That's
was
actually what we're trying to say.
It's the
Had
funny thing
had
about that.
dictators like Augusto Pinochet who were extremely
Pinochet,
pro-U.S. Even in Pinochet's lyrics, he literally talks about Bernardo O'Higgins
O'Higgins.
or Higgins or whatever.
I call him O'Higgins just to be a
O'Higgins
little.
or something. Yes, who was also extremely pro-West and pro-UK.
So,
The
like
funny
on
thing,
all this, I just want to interject just a little bit for um, just to provide some clarity on kind of where I think Hispanics in general should be in terms of how they present themselves, how their history is presented. And I just want to just launch a couple things that are kind of neglected, especially if you come from if any of you, obviously, if you guys come from if you were nurtured in an American or any a Canadian school, you definitely would know that they told you basically all the achievements of primarily Anglo Americans, British, to some degree French because the Enlightenment, but outside of the Enlightenment, they don't even give French people that much notoriety.
it
I would
depends.
definitely say the one person I think I don't know if you guys know him, but there was a British guy named William Harvey who people believe apparently, okay, so in the West, people believe that William Harvey was a dude who discovered the circulation of the blood, and this technically is not true. He actually proposed. Um, Actually, no, he didn't even really propose it. He actually built on it, but he didn't discover. You get what I'm trying to say? He built on it 100 years after a Spanish guy did. A dude by the name of Francisco de la Reina he already knew about it. So in a sense, it's kind of like stealing. It's like a point of. It's like saying
The
it's the
English
earliest record
tradition,
of Anglicization.
the English tradition of stealing others' achievements. In other words,
Pretty
Exactly.
much. Like there was also a time when they I don't know if you guys know, like on the map you look, it's called the Cook Strait, like named
yeah,
after James Cook, even though technically it wasn't actually named after him. They
Mhm.
basically just changed the name, and that's how I guess it just
now
stuck. It just you know
to our
they
viewers
just took it,
here,
and
to our
it is
viewers,
what it is.
to our viewers,
Aside from
you
that,
might.
another example I think I can is
Yes.
To our viewers,
what's his name? Do you guys know?
what do you think?
And okay, I'm gonna give this example just because a lot of you guys happen to be Mexican. You guys know what I mean, obviously. But
Yes.
um, I don't know if you guys have heard of Luis Miramontes, the guy who basically invented birth control.
Mhm.
Yeah, vaguely. I only heard about Camarena and the television.
Yeah, hopefully, like no, here's the one thing. While people still give him credit, I feel like there's a growing movement where people want to recognize not necessarily his efforts, but they want to give it to like big pharma and American corporations, like give them the title of upholding like the inventing of birth control pills. Or like sometimes they'll
Exactly.
even be crazy enough to give it to like Planned Parenthood, even though Planned Parenthood does not even do that.
Didn't they give the person who invented birth control? Didn't they give that to Margaret Sanger?
They did
No,
actually,
she
yeah.
was like,
They gave them they
I,
literally took the
I,
notoriety away from him and they gave it to Margaret Sanger. And it's actually
I
kinda sad.
I think it was
Exactly.
like two things. One, that's not really sad. I mean, this is birth control after all. Two, I think Margaret Sanger was the one who was like, well, the thing about Margaret Sanger, she's extremely racist. I think she was like if I remember correctly, she was pro eugenics, and I don't think she founded birth control. She was like she founded Planned Parenthood, if I'm correct, and also
Yeah,
Yes.
you're right. But what I'm trying to say is that when I say stealing notoriety, I'm trying to say that in the eyes of the world, they are the ones that kind of proliferated it, not the Mexican scientist Luis Miramontes who actually did the work. And I'll tell
Yeah.
you, and I can prove this. Okay, I can prove it because there were systematic efforts to take the patent away from him.
let me just say two things. To our viewers, going on to tangents is going to be a common theme of this podcast, so bear with us, please. We're mentally exceptional. We need to get that out of the way. We're
No,
all
no,
mentally
listen,
exceptional
look,
here.
it's
What
not,
is
it's not tangent. I'll tell you why it's not a tangent. It's not a tangent because one, it did happen. Two, it continues to happen. And three, it's an actual problem because this affects and governs how Hispanics see themselves in a country that's not theirs.
Well, the reason why I say we're tangenting is because we're on the migrant crisis.
exactly?
Okay, well, going back to the migrant crisis, I think like
Yeah.
I
Before we
think
get way too carried off and we
okay.
head off to Antarctica.
I think the way it should be looked at is statistically. Like U.S. population growth is the slowest it's been in its history. So I mean, yeah, there's an unprecedented amount of migrants coming in, but looking at statistically, it's not that much more of an impact on the American system, and like our tax system. They're not that much. They're not as much as a tax burden as like little kids, for example, because for schooling and costs out of parents' pockets that could be spent on something else. That's a lot of money. And most migrants, yeah, some of them do go on like social safety net stuff, and there's something to be said for that. But a lot of them just work, which is what they come for.
Exactly.
The
So I think
crux of the
they
the
should be
crux
allowed.
of
And
sorry
well,
about that. Go ahead. I think the crux of the problem just lies at the whole internal fear of being replaced. That no
yeah,
one wants to become a minority in their own country, and that's understandable. However, I just would say that the big problem is that the people fear that more are not doing anything to actually solve it. If anything, they're just making it worse with unbridled degeneracy, we might well say, pornography, birth control, and all that. Which is why I say that it's not really an achievement that we Mexicans might want to take. That's just me. That I
well,
think that's the big point of it.
I think the only way to actually solve it is at its root, right? Like these people are fleeing from like they're gonna get into the U.S. one way or another somehow if they're dedicated enough. You know what I mean? I guess you could say up border security, but a lot of them don't even go through the actual border. Most of them actually go through air. But
Yeah,
the problem is at its roots is the internal issues of these countries that they come from, like
Exactly.
Nicaragua or El Salvador and even
Guatemala,
Colombia or other South and Central American countries.
Guatemala, and all those countries.
no, I think one way you can solve is what if you just go back to this is one solution. This might be a stepping stone to Pan-Hispanism. What if we just go back to the Central American Republic? That republic that came after the Mexican Empire. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, listen, here's the thing. Listen, I suggest that, but
That
the
wouldn't
issue is
solve
that
the issue.
most of you guys were not really fond of that idea because when
Well,
I suggested it, you said,
people like
no, wait,
Adali
wait, no, it wasn't you guys, it was Adalid. Adalid said, oh, it should just become Mexico. And then I forgot, it was one of you said, well, it should be Colombia and we
no,
should
no,
just
no, no,
make the
no, no, no,
country some new banana republic, something like
no,
that.
no, no, no. I said Panama, Costa Rica would be better as united with Colombia.
When it
Honestly,
comes
listen,
to
I'll say this. Redrawing borders in Latin America is probably the last thing we need to do because, like, yes, I understand, like, if you're a pan-Hispanist, like, the goal is to technically redraw the
here's the
border,
thing.
but
Here's the thing,
before you can
paper.
even do that, you have to work with what you have.
We're not
Yeah,
really withdrawing the
exactly.
borders. We're not withdrawing the borders. See, the first thing is to minimize the borders between the countries. That's the whole point. What I'm saying that we should have a
Well, then that's
Central
redrawing
American
the borders,
Republic.
basically.
The whole thing that you should strive for a better country is a better economy. I don't think redrawing the border is really going to necessarily help that. Like if Gran Colombia sprouted out of nowhere, I mean, why would the Colombian people want to subsidize Venezuela? You know what I mean? Or
Well,
the
not
Panamanian people
Venezuela,
want to.
but Panama and Costa Rica are actually very rich regions, actually.
Yeah, but not like why would they want to join though? Like why would because per capita Costa Rica is a lot richer than Colombia.
Okay, let
Why
me give
would
you an example
why would they want to
that
be in the
actually
same country?
suits the content of what we're talking about. Okay, I think many of you guys know Simon Bolivar. Like, he wasn't the one. He wasn't the only general who was part of it. It was Paez was the one who technically led the the movement of the people who lived in the Venezuelan plains, and that's how Venezuela eventually became its own country. But the issue is that just redrawing the borders first, and I think at this point we probably all can agree, but let me just explain why. If you just redraw the borders and you don't focus on the economy, you create two issues. One, you create countries that are, inspired by irredentism, and secondly, you're going to just drive separatism just out of control. Because one,
Exactly.
if one country now is certainly absorbed into another country, then that country is going to be like, well, hey, we have a higher GDP than yours. We're a richer country. We want to be independent. So it just makes
Yeah.
the problem worse.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you can strive for economic regional blocks first, and to some degree, I'm going to refer to Nazi Germany just because I want to give you guys an idea. But they tried to strive for autarky, basically making yourself as self-sufficient as possible. The second that Latin America can do that, they won't need crap from you.
Now that
Well,
would be a separate
exactly.
discussion.
I mean, that's the whole
Right,
point. The whole
I
point is to
think
make
we can-
Latin America not reliant on other places for its.
I mean,
Well,
we don't live in that world anymore. That was fine before
Yeah,
a
that's what I'm saying.
globalism, but we live in a world where you kind of have to be integrated to the global economy to
That's
succeed.
why I was.
That's
That's
why
why I
I
was
said
saying
regional.
that.
No, hold up. I said regional because here's the
No,
thing: nobody can be purely autarkic, even in that world. And you have to remember, the world was just as globalized back then. This is like 1945, still a globalized
I mean, I
world.
would say less than now, obviously, but yes.
I mean, I think pushing for a self-sufficient economy is just anyone's goal.
That's a different discussion whether
Okay, you're Mike. You're
or not
unintelligible.
you
Like,
can pocket.
See, my issue is this: I don't think we can necessarily mix. There has to be a part of the Pan-Hispanistic element that understands. But like, don't get me wrong. I'm
you cut out. You said you cut out after you cut out.
me.
Yeah, you cut out
Yeah.
after said I'm for. You're for what?
Oh, okay, my bad. Well, basically, like I said, I know I'm Orthodox technically, but I do have a tenuous amount of respect for Catholics. I just think that there has to be a part of the movement that realizes that if you're going to make economic theory, you shouldn't necessarily mix it with trying to get people to support the dissolution of one state or another, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It makes yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, I agree fundamentally. Like, what was that?
I guess we might as well talk about the Catholic social doctrine, how superior it is to Protestantism, and that's a big problem now. This Hispanic world, where
I think we should keep our topics like on, like, wasn't it
The
supposed to be like
yeah,
just
good
the
point.
Hispanic movement
the
and
economy and
totality?
also
Good
the
point. I'll
aspect,
just
basically getting these people to support the movement.
Like, look,
Oh.
I'm going to say this,
Mhm.
just to build off of like what one of you guys was saying earlier, yes, Central America has its issues, but here's the funny thing about Central America. Central America doesn't really have any geopolitical relevance, if you get what I'm trying to say. In a sense, it doesn't have any relevance outside of Panama. And the only thing Panama really could provide, and I'll say with the exception of Nicaragua and maybe Costa Rica, is trying to compete with Panama and build another canal.
Yeah.
Even so, not really that feasible in the end. Those are the only.
Nicaragua, I think, was trying to build another canal at one point.
They were, but here's the issue, right? Is that Nicaragua, although they want to do it, it's always been in Nicaragua's interest to try to get some other power to sponsor it. And
Yeah.
where that plays in is that now you have the Chinese coming in and saying, "Hey, well, you can borrow from us, and some of our Chinese firms will go and build it for you."
Exactly.
don't worry. We will not put you in a debt trap.
Yeah.
And see, I don't know if you guys
That's another
understand.
thing that I'm really big against is Nicaragua is one of the few Latin American countries that does not subscribe to the West, but because of that, they're forced to just suck up to China instead. And I believe I saw a video. I don't remember where I saw it. Building a canal through Nicaragua would actually deny so many Nicaraguans. I don't remember how many Nicaraguans, but a significant percentage. It would deny all of them clean water because it goes through several lakes that are the source of water for a significant percentage of the Nicaraguan population.
Exactly. And another issue is that it's not really necessary because as long as the Panama Canal's there, what's the point of doing it? And
Well, the point
secondly,
of
if it
doing
were to be done, that
Mhm.
would be disastrous because one, we already outsourced the job of the Panama Canal, be it through ill will to the Americans, and now we're gonna give up glory to the Chinese. How does that sound? Like
Exactly.
they're robbing us. They're robbing us of our own will to do things that we should be doing ourselves.
So you think it should just be like Nicaraguan labor doing it?
Well, yeah, of course. Like I'm
If
saying, if
This
it
is the
wants
thing,
to
Nicaragua
be,
wants to build a
it
canal through
should
their
be.
own, they should have the
Like I'm
right
saying,
to.
Nicaragua has to be benefiting from it because right now
that's why that's the sad
Nicaragua
thing,
is
right?
getting Nicaragua is. I don't intend to curse on this podcast, but I'm going to say this: one, it's getting screwed over because it's in debt. Two,
Well, saying
its labor
Spanish,
market
saying
is not
Spanish.
benefiting. Three,
Well, you have to curse in Spanish
it's
so we can get passed
it's
through.
not getting any tax revenue. So what's the point?
Exactly.
I mean, I
We-
think no, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And
The
even
two,
so, you know what that might
sad
also
thing.
end up doing in the future? It might end up straining relations with Panama because Panama is going to be like, "Hey, well, why are you taking away? You're taking away the money that should be going to me," which is
I think
overall bad for Pan-Hispanism.
like
If you
here's
can't get
the
them to work together and you have them competing for the same thing, then what's the point?
Hmm.
And then you
the
have China
two.
playing. Do you know how easy it is for China to just move their strings in and puppet one against the other?
Mhm.
Like arguably, I say that that's worse than what the Americans ever did.
This is what I was going to say that the sad thing is that the canal, suppose that this canal is ever going to get built, it's not going to be by Nicaraguan hands. It's going to be by Chinese hands. It's happened everywhere from Pakistan, parts in Africa. It's always going to be
And
built by Chinese labor, just as a way to let out steam in the country, China. And also,
we just
well,
say
this
that
entire scheme, this entire
as much
scheme
as
is
we
like,
are as much as we are West skeptic, I believe us Pan-Hispanists, we're not anti-West, but we are West skeptic. But that does not make us pro-East. We are not pro-China. We are not pro-Russia. At least not pro-Russian influence over our countries.
Well, I
Nick,
have to say
the,
this.
the Nick, the viewers were they were hearing us bash China. I don't think they're going to guess we're pro Chinese.
Yeah, I know, but
I
what
don't
I'm
think West skeptic is necessarily the way we would define ourselves. I mean, maybe there's a certain sect of us that might be skeptical of the West in general. I think, but here's the thing: I don't think that being skeptical of the Anglosphere is necessarily being skeptical of the West. I think there's still a great deal of things we can appreciate about certain
well, that's
places
why I
like
said West
Sweden,
skeptic
Germany,
instead
France.
of
Like
West.
those, some of those places actually have done great things for the West. It's the Anglophone nations that, as they say, the Five Eyes that are actually kind
UK,
of wrecking
Canada,
us. If you get what I'm trying to say.
UK, Canada, US, Australia. Those are the main countries we're skeptical of. Now, we're not anti these countries. We're not anti the existence of these countries, but we are skeptical of their influence over Latin America.
Oh, just
Just
into
as
you
we are
went to
skeptical of China and Russia's influence over Latin America.
just you guys went to and Sawyer comes in here. He's going to blow us all away on how bad it can get.
Insario is an independent man with his own independent opinions.
He's also
I'm an independent woman.
Exactly. Independent black woman who don't need no man.
Yeah, for real.
and Sawyer is not suicidal. Let's get that out of the way. He is not suicidal. In fact, none of us are suicidal. In case of any special glow in the dark agent hears
I
this,
don't
we are
think
not
anyone's gonna do
suicidal
that. But okay. Uh,
yet.
let's get back to the topics. So Nicaragua I think they did have an election a few years ago, in
A
which the
few
majority of the Western countries condemned. Uh, Daniel Ortega won with 75% of the vote. His opponent Walter Espinosa only got 14% of the vote. Many of the Western countries believed it was cheated. What do you guys think about that?
I'm going to say the thing that I've always said before. Daniel Ortega is a child molester, and that's undeniable. I do not like him. He's a child molester and also a commie. That's it.
What do you think, Baber or Anthony? Okay, I guess he's AFK.
Yeah, I don't know what
Anyway,
happened to Andy.
yeah, I don't know. I'm asking you, Anthony.
Oh yeah, no, nothing happened with me. I just had to
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
rejoin.
Well, I'm asking you about the election of Daniel Ortega and Nicaragua's status and
Yeah,
what happened with Nicaragua.
yeah, I'm sorry, your voice
There
is
was an
kind of
elect,
choppy right
huh?
You said you sounded choppy.
My voice?
Yes,
Oh, I
at least
apologize.
mine.
Sorry about that. Well, anyways, I just want to know what your thoughts are on Nicaragua and Daniel Ortega and the election, the 2021 general election, which Daniel Ortega won 75% of the vote.
Oh yeah, I heard briefly about it too. Honestly, I've been hearing a lot about him being um, a dictator and being kind of repressive and obviously not being too friendly towards democracy. And honestly, there's always going to be, um, honestly, I don't want to go ahead and say that um, he's necessarily good or bad because I think that right there can be done simply in a simple advice video. CNN or any
Hmm.
Hmm.
we should look at for the most business. I think we should look at what exactly he's been doing for Hispanism in general. That's how we judge, because
Well,
that's the only thing that's
well,
going to matter in 50 years from now. Same thing for people like Pinochet. I would definitely say, when it comes to like a good example of this is Bukele for El Salvador. I think El Salvador, they're doing a good job on MS-13, but I think where the big sin of Bukele is not supporting the native language in El Salvador. That's the one issue. I'm not trying to say that they should promote it as a state language, but I'm trying to say that it should be protected and preserved because
exactly. As much as we support Pan-Hispanism, which we are united by the Spanish language, um, I do believe that people within their own countries should be able to speak whatever their own indigenous languages. We definitely believe in the preservation of indigenous languages and indigenous cultures. Um, Even though we do not believe in indigenismo or Bolivarianism, we still believe in the right for indigenous people to practice their cultures and speak their language.
Now that would be a great topic to talk about indigenismo, how it's a false god. The However, I'm just going to say this about Bukele. The other big sin is supporting Bitcoin. That's also pretty retarded. And
Yes,
also ultimately about Ortega, like I said before, it's not just the fact that this is easy to get brushed aside by the media in parentheses about how his accusations, let's just say, by his I think is his stepdaughter or adopted daughter, that how he molested her.
he was
That to
gay,
me
right?
that's the
Wait, who are you talking about? Bukele?
no,
no
Daniel Ortega,
Ortega.
president of Nicaragua.
I'm gonna say
Okay.
this. I'm not really too
And I think
concerned with
that's the bigger
scandals.
sin.
I think scandals are not important. You guys can disagree with me on this one because here's the issue, right? I think American politics is too full of scandals and not full of solutions. And even so, with in regards to Bukele, if you would have asked me this like last week, whether I think Bukele was stupid for putting
Well, this is not
cryptocurrency as
Bukele.
the
This is an accusation against
he's
Ortega.
actually
It's not
the
Bukele.
national currency, yes, I would have agreed with you. But I kind of understand why he did it. He did it because he wanted to raise capital, and you can't really raise capital that easy in a country that has high crime.
Okay, we're going back to Bukele.
And I mean,
So
say
in a
what you
sense, I
will about
understand why he did
crypto,
it.
but I mean,
Hold on,
hey,
hold on, hold on. Our viewers might get confused because we kind of like talked apples and oranges here with Daniel Ortega and Bukele. So
Just
I'm
to
going
be
to clarify
careful on
this.
we're talking
Daniel
about Bukele
Ortega
right
was the
now.
one accused of being a pedophile and molesting his stepdaughter, and
Okay.
Bukele is the one who's cracking down on the indigenous languages. I
And also,
apologize for the apples and oranges talk, but we should pick one topic and stick with it. What would you guys want to pick?
I'll let people decide first.
Okay, paper. Which would you want to continue on?
I don't
I
know,
think
Dino
Bukele. I
Nuggets.
think that's more. Most people know
Okay,
more
so
about
we'll continue to talk
Bukele
about
than him.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
Thank
well, I have no opinion about Bukele and the national language things. As for the moment, that should be just a regional. Like, I feel like when it comes to languages, that should just be a regional problem, not a federal level.
I
think
definitely do believe that Bukele's policies might help Pan-Hispanism a bit, but it also might give it a bad name among the more indigenous people. And
well, that's
keep in mind that
the
we
name.
welcome people of every race from the Hispanic countries. We have no ill
I
will
don't
towards
know.
any person of any color.
I don't know about paper. I don't know. I don't know.
you.
Paper. You have any comments?
No comment.
Yeah, he has no comment. Anyways, um, but I do believe uh, that these policies could help Pan-Hispanism a bit, even if the exact policies we don't necessarily agree with.
Fair enough. The thing is I'm confused about is whether Bukele did this in the name of Hispanism, as what you're saying, or
I don't
was
believe he did.
another moment.
I
Okay.
don't believe he did. I think he did that to professionalize his people. Uh, Obviously, Spanish is a very growing business language right now because a lot of Hispanic countries are growing in wealth. Um, and I think that was his intention with it. However, it obviously it backfired. Now, what do you think? Or do you think this? Why do you think he's targeting these indigenous languages?
Oh, what's up, Nick?
Why do you think he's targeting these indigenous languages?
He's not that he's targeting them.
Mm.
I think what it is like I said, the article that me and Ensario saw is that we saw it was a specific institution that he was essentially doing it for at their request. So that tells me that there must have been some sort of lobbyist activity, which is expected. Obviously, there were some other people who were saying, "Oh, they did this because a majority of MS-13 and those gangs down there are primarily comprised of Indios," which I beg to differ because even so, um, there's a
Hmm.
big distinction to be made between um, people in MS-13 who are mostly of indigenous descent and people who speak the Nahuatl language primarily in their own communities. You get what I'm trying to say?
Exactly.
So I don't necessarily, because here's the thing, I feel like while the rest of the Western world is basically praising Bukele for what he's doing in terms of like combating the whole drug, the gang warfare, but the second
I'm
that
going.
you have people the
I'm going
second
to
that you have
disagree on
people
that.
criticizing Bukele and saying, "Oh, he's targeting the natives because Indios are the ones that do most of the crime," the second you start saying that, that's when it's bad for Pan-Hispanism.
Exactly.
I'm going
Because
to.
it gives Pan-Hispanism a bad name. A lot of people to this day, uh, and it's because of propaganda.
Like, I
A
guess
lot of
a
people to
better way
this
to
day
say it is that
associate the Spanish Empire
our
with
ideal
genocide of Native
when it
American
comes to
people.
society, what we want to see is we want to see. Go ahead.
I said a lot of people associate the Spanish Empire with the genocide of Native people, so it does not look good when these countries continue to crack down on indigenous languages, and we're over here saying, "Hey, we're pan-Hispanist, we're spreading this." They're just going to see us as an anti-indigenous movement. It feeds into the propaganda they've been fed.
I'm going to be honest now. In regards to what the media portrays Bukele, I'm going to say it's actually more negative. The way they portray Bukele's war against crime is like they want to portray as this backroom dealer who's making these deals with the gangs. He's not actually fighting them. I think it's more negative. What do you think? Do you
No, I disagree. All I see are videos, mega
See, the issue
prisión,
with this, the
the
whole
biggest
people
prison
who
in the
try to,
middle.
and I'm just gonna.
Anyways, I just see videos of them like them like making prisoners clean up like trash
Certain
or
Latinos in general who will like for whatever reason they'll commit this fallacy and it's so prevalent. What they'll do is they'll put the burden of proof or they'll simply dislodge the woes of their country on the Spanish Empire. And I feel like that's the biggest fallacy ever, because the second you
Exactly.
do that, you're basically telling your people, oh well, it's not our issue. It's because the Spanish Empire did this. Listen, the
It's
Spanish
not our
Empire
fault we're
did their
corrupt.
part. Exactly.
Yeah, it's
Like
not our fault we're corrupt. It's
it's
not our fault.
essentially it's like saying, oh, it's not our fault. So in a sense, how can a country like that take responsibility for itself?
I don't think a lot. I mean, do these countries really blame a lot on the Spanish Empire? Like, is that
Oh, yes,
A
they
lot of
do.
them do.
Yes, they
No,
do.
a lot of them do. You're like, look at Hugo Chavez. Like
Hugo Chavez?
even
Okay.
It's a
listen,
lot of
even AMLO does it.
AMLO does do it. He does. My
Yeah,
mother,
that's
my
true.
mother was educated in the Mexican system, and all the history was blaming the Spanish for everything. She still believes a lot of what they went through is because of because of what the Spanish did. When in
Now,
reality, it was Mexican state mismanagement.
when it comes to the Black Legend blaming Spain for everything, do we blame it all on Bartolome de las Casas or on the British Empire as a whole?
Well, I think that's the thing. I don't think it should be blamed completely on the British Empire either. I think it's also blamed on these countries, these governments that have been in power for decades and just
And
are
see, the
in
issue
there to profit themselves.
that the
Just
people
like
make
any
that point
Western market.
never point out exactly what the Spanish did.
Hmm.
Well, I don't think life under the Spanish Empire was as glorious as you think. I mean,
Well, I
everyone in
mean,
the world was.
who said it was glorious?
No. I'm just saying, like, the Spanish weren't. I mean, they were okay, I guess, but they weren't better or worse than anyone else, I think. And I think the only reasons, the Spanish colonies didn't do as good as America or the English colonies, for example, is because they just didn't industrialize. And I wouldn't put that on really any
That's not
other
really
power.
true. They were in the process of
First of all,
industrializing, actually.
a lot of these people
I
do blame
think
the
what gets confused. Go ahead.
Spanish. A lot of these people do blame the Spanish Empire for the and for the reason why their countries aren't very prosperous, especially in Mexico. I can't speak for every country, obviously. I don't know if the Philippines is like that or if
Oh,
other
the
countries are
Philippines is
like that.
very industrialized, but part
Oh,
of
but
that
do
is
they blame a lot
because
of their problems on Spain?
see, like here's the thing, right? Spain
The
got
Philippines
the
is
ball
very
rolling in
industrialized.
terms
You're
of like
saying
the
that?
Philippines, but the Americans kind of had to finish it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the thing. Is
What?
a lot of these former Spanish colonies blame their lack of
I mean, it
state
is like
mismanagement.
literally, like I'm telling you, like okay, look at. I'm pretty sure. Go in your closet, look at all the shirts that you have. Pretty sure one of them says "Made in the Philippines."
That doesn't mean you're necessarily industrialized. Like, I think the Philippines has like an urban population of less than 50%.
Well, we actually have a lot of things made in Mexico. I guarantee you, every one of us at least has one thing made in Mexico too. So,
Yeah.
like, I have pens made in Mexico. So Mexico is pretty
Well, yeah, I know
industrialized
that's my
too. If you,
point. But
It's industrializing, but I wouldn't say it's industrialized on the
yes,
same
it's
scale as a lot of
industrialized.
other
it
places.
depends what type of industry you're talking about. The thing I don't like about that word "industrialized" is that people take it as just like here's the thing: people think of industrialization as just place a factory and that's it. That's what comes to mind. People don't have an idea of what that looks like in figures. Like, for example, you could say when it comes to countries like the Philippines and war industry, right? They don't have that. They're not like Great
Definitely,
Britain that has Vickers Armstrong or Germany that has Krupp factories or America that has Lockheed Martin. They're not like that. They have to get their weapons from other nations' industries. So in a sense, in that
exactly,
way, you could say, yes, the Philippines does not have industry. But when it comes to the basic necessities in terms of like foodstuffs, textiles, they have that. Even technology to
exactly.
some degree. Like your semiconductors probably come from East Asia.
Hmm.
Yeah, but not from the Philippines.
Don't don't say not from the Philippines. Like I'm telling you.
Uh, Pretty sure not from the Philippines. I mean,
Are you
maybe
sure?
like a very, very, very small
Listen,
percent.
transistors are literally manufactured in the Philippines. Just because you see on the news, oh, the Taiwan Semiconductor Company, no, the transistors are made in the
I
Philippines, and
mean, there
then
could be a very, very small amount, but that's not really
Transistors are important. What do you mean?
No, but it's
Where
probably
do the
very
resources come
small.
from?
It's not a large share of the world amount. I mean, it's not.
Are
know
you
what I mean?
sure? Because right now there's a geopolitical crisis over the Taiwan Semiconductor Company. And guess what? Half of their ties either come from China or the Philippines in terms of their suppliers. Without them, like what's the company? It's not worth fighting over the company. You get what I'm trying to say? Clearly, the
Exactly.
company has geopolitical hegemony, right?
Definitely.
At the end of the day, the points Andy's trying to make is that while Philippines is not an industrialized country, is that it's growing as a major, how can I put this, sweatshop of sorts.
What do you mean
Yeah.
sweatshop?
It's where basically where all of our cheap goods are coming from, instead from when China is. I'm not sure what's the situation right now in China right now after Evergrande. Is that
Yes.
Philippines
Well, after the
innovation
war
is
with China, Trump's trade war with China outsourced manufacturing to a lot of different countries: Vietnam,
Well,
Philippines,
in a
Mexico,
sense,
India. You name it.
you're kind of defeating your own argument, and well, no, in a sense, that kind of defeats Andy's argument because if you're trying to say that the Philippines does not have industry
I
or
wasn't
is
saying that. I wouldn't.
or is not industrial at all, why
I
in the
didn't say it
hell
wasn't industrial at all.
why are
The whole,
industrial why are services that are provided by industries themselves being outsourced to those countries?
I
Let me
wouldn't.
give
The
some
this
context.
whole discussion started with me saying that Latin America didn't industrialize like Great Britain did, and
Okay, they
people
did
blame
not
that.
like Great Britain did, but they
Or
did.
really at all. I mean,
No, but not all. See, not at all is
Andy,
kind of that's not
excuse
really
me.
okay,
true.
yeah. That is not true. You're right.
Excuse
You're
me.
right.
Excuse me.
Not at all, but very little they did.
And here's the thing. I'm just gonna I'm not trying to like get at you like that, Andy, but I'm just gonna say this. I'll give you an example. Like if you look at Puerto Rico and Havana, there were steamships literally in every port. Secondly, Puerto Rico was one of the first places in Latin America to have a gridiron system, just like Germany, Japan, all those places.
I mean,
Okay.
of course there were
Wait, wait,
steamships
wait.
in their port. They were
Guys,
exporting sugar from those places to
guys,
Western
wait.
countries.
Here's the defeatist point of Paper's argument. Argentina back then was actually one of the most richest countries. What went
Not from
wrong?
industry.
Whoa, hold up! Before you declare my argument defeatist, at least tell me why it is.
No, defeated. Defeated is
Defeatist.
that
How in the hell is Paper's argument defeatist? What?
I didn't saw defeatist. I said defeated.
Oh,
I said the only thing that could defeat Paper's argument is that back then Argentina was one of the richest countries that was in the early 1900s. How do you explain
Well,
it?
Argentina. Yeah,
It
yeah, you
wasn't
are right
based off
about
of
that. Like,
industry. It was
here's
based
the
off
thing.
of agriculture.
What I'm trying to say is I'm trying to strike a chord of balance. I'm trying to say, well, on one hand, I'm not trying to say I'd agree with Andy as in like Latin America didn't industrialize at all. But at the same time, I'm not trying to say that Latin America industrialized equally.
Actually, he's the point. He's a good valid argument that I could make. Spain was industrializing. Spain was in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. And one went wrong. A little Corsican LARPing French fag named Napoleon came along and ruined it in his invasion.
I definitely Napoleon took part in the dissolution of the Hispanic world. Yes, but I don't think it's all to be blamed on that either.
It was because of him Spain did not reach the levels in the Industrial Revolution as Britain did. Like I said, Spain was in the midst of developing in the Industrial Revolution. There's many statistics and uh, what's the word documents or studies made on that, and how that was all completely destroyed with the Peninsula War. How the British and French destroyed industrial plants and textile factories.
Exactly.
I mean, but what's the excuse for after Napoleon was defeated? They still didn't
The
industrialize.
political
Well,
instability.
after Napoleon's defeat, the governments that came after him were still in power. The new
No,
the House of
no,
Bourbon that was now in power thanks to Napoleon was still in power.
no, the
The
political instability, the
political
introduction of
institutions, yes. The political institutions set up by the Napoleonic governments were still in power.
stability,
So the fact that Napoleon's
instability.
defeat meant all the Napoleonic things were gone has little merit.
I said political instability.
Yes,
and
yes, but
instability coming.
most of the things set up by Napoleon, actually, a lot of them are still in power. Um,
I'm
I
just
mean,
okay.
rightly so. But even when it comes to Spain, you have to remember, even outside of Napoleon's invasion, Spain was still invaded like some years later because even so, 1830, the Bourbons invaded, and literally with the support of everybody else in Europe, they were invaded
exactly.
quite soon after. So in a sense, what room does that leave?
Mhm.
We'll say that question again.
Not to mention that Britain was had people like Simon Bolivar who waged war on the entire Americas, America's colonies of Spanish Empire,
And
destabilizing South America even more. What room is there to industrialize?
I want to point out that when it comes to the Industrial Revolution,
This
there's
podcast.
if you want to visualize it, imagine a graph and you start at the origin and you you crescendo upwards and then you plateau and then it goes exponentially higher.
See,
Only Britain was able to do that. And the
the
reason
Industrial
why was
Revolution
because
happened at the time
by
right
eight
when the Empire was falling.
well, it didn't even have time. Yeah, like I said, it didn't have time to go through that stage. Secondly, this was before, and also you have to remember that while all this was happening, the British, like, do you really believe that British, like, once they conquered India, that they're gonna just keep trading with the Spanish? Well, hell no. And
Exactly.
largely,
That was the
I would
thing.
definitely say a large, if not all of the Creole all the Creoles who were in the aristocracy in all of those nations, especially Colombia, most of them were all agricultural. It was more agriculturally centric. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even if you were a small industrialist, and that's why like I said, in the 1850s and 60s, they called if you were an industrialist, they called you the bourgeoisie because you didn't have power. You didn't have as much power as those aristocrats. It wasn't until the 1870s and 80s that industrialists actually became known as the big boys in town.
Exactly. And during this time, when industrialists started becoming the big boys in town, the Spanish world, including Spain and all these Spanish colonies, were simply way too broken to even worry about industrializing.
Exactly. So in a sense, and here's the issue, right? When like I'm gonna just call it the War of 1898, but
Mhm.
for formal reasons, let's call it the Spanish American
El
War.
desastre. El desastre 98.
Yeah, basically. Cuba and Puerto Rico, and I'm gonna say the Philippines. Those countries are a good example, with the exception of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not a country. Those are good examples of parts of the Spanish Empire that were united long enough to be able to industrialize to some degree. However, in the case of Puerto Rico and Cuba, Cuba got its independence, but we all know what happened. Communism took over. So Puerto Rico, essentially, and to some degree, the Philippines are the only real relics of exploration that we can really use to prove our points. In terms of
Mhm.
Puerto
Now,
Rico,
guys,
Puerto
guys,
Rico really had its yeah.
Yeah.
okay, I need to say this. This isn't supposed to be. This isn't going to be serious, but after all this, we need to talk about Cuban pussy.
Bro,
All right. Anyways, paper, go ahead.
we're still
Like I
recording.
said,
Go ahead.
Puerto Rico in some ways is it's the only object of like exploration for us to really prove how exactly Spain did industrialize. However, when the Americans got there, and I was telling Nick about this earlier. One of the first things that happened was in 1900, the U.S. appointed as the cabinet of one of the American appointed governors. Six of them were Puerto Rican members of the bourgeoisie, so they were the high class. Jose de Diego was one of them. But they also appointed this guy named Martin Grove
Oh,
Brumbaugh,
I saw this.
who
I saw
happened to
this.
be he happened to be some educator. He went on to become I guess the Ministry of Education for Puerto Rico, and he did some horrible things in terms of um, just changing over, giving and I'm not gonna say it's not an honest overhaul. It was a horrible overhaul of the education system. He fired and deported a great majority of the officials who were working at the schools. Faculty was laid off. You best believe it was very horrible. Like I'm telling you, if you want to look at a place where the social issue can be observed without prejudice, look at Puerto Rico, because just 2 years after 1900, school absenteeism shot up 98%.
Mm.
Well,
I don't think,
this
and
is why
we can't find any records that say that happened in uh, former Mexican territories after the Mexican American War. But I guarantee you, it was probably close to that too. We don't know. But I can tell you this: for
We
Puerto
know,
Rico,
but school
we have
records weren't
documented
there.
proof.
Yeah.
now for our viewers out there, at the end of the day, when we look at Puerto Rico, it's a good example of how education is the conqueror or the defeater. If you can
Exactly.
change the history of a nation, you have completely conquered it. If you change the mentality of how they became a people or a society, you effectively destroy the nation. A good example is let me think. Mexico, for example, we're taught from a young age that it was the Spanish arrival was a conquista, an invasion. We're never told about how the Spanish were held by native Tascalec. I'm blanking here. Tascal. Andy, you know what I'm talking about? The term.
Like Texcocoans? I don't
Yeah,
Texcoco,
The Pax Hispanica.
Purepesha. We're never
know.
taught
We know
about
what
this.
you're talking about.
We're only taught that we
yeah,
were all Aztecs.
allies.
We're taught
The
that we
native
were all
allies.
Aztecs. And the Spanish came and conquered us. We're not
No,
taught about the Purepesha. We're not taught about those people. Because when the
the
moment they teach about those people
Alright, you guys are
is the
talking over
moment
each other
your
one at a
argument
time.
starts to die.
we were taught from a young age how it was always the Spanish and only the Spanish. We're not talking about how it was the native allies as well. After that, we're talked about how during the Mexican American War, how it was Santa Anna who sold half the country, not the ruling Liberal Party at the time who did. And then finally, and best of all, Maximiliano, how he was an invader, a conqueror, a white gringo, as you may, when in reality he was the best thing we had to an actual head of state. Nick, you can go.
Yes. So basically, the majority of the natives, Texcocos, Tlaxcala, Purepecha, they all supported the Spanish because the Aztec Empire was a
Tascateca.
oppressive empire. Was an oppressive empire that that was 1,000 times worse than the Spanish.
I just remember the Tascatecas.
Yes, those people too. And this was not a matter of white against native. This was simply a matter of an empire against a bunch of tribes with 400 conquistadors from Europe supporting them. And they agreed to fight under the banner of the Catholic Church and the empire and the crown.
Of course, we can always say that this was also a battle between paganism and Catholicism.
Yes, it was.
At the end of the day, like the point I was saying is that education is the key to a nation's future, and whether or not the people are going to see themselves as inheritors or enslaved.
You
What
know,
do you
I
think,
think
Paper?
one of the issues, something that really stifled Spanish America is that I'd say, and I'm going to say this is, let's say, on a scale of 60 years out from 1820, you had America making a pretty good and big impression on a lot of the Spanish American countries. And it's partially for that reason that their education systems are just as jacked up as that of the US. The only difference was that Puerto Rico did not have that until 1898. And I say 1898 was actually more tragic because it literally showed the rest of Latin America. It was kind of, in a sense, it was kind of like America tricked the rest of Latin America into cheering that on. The same thing
Exactly.
with how they tricked Panamanians into saying, "Oh, we'll give you your independence, but you have to give us a canal."
The Americans tricked Latin Americans into cheering on the killing and the oppression of their own brothers.
What do you guys think about the U.S. Like Lindsey Graham's bill to like try and get the U.S. to designate cartels as terrorist organizations?
Oh yes,
Honestly, I saw it more as a diversionary tactic to try to distract the people from Ukraine turning to a stalemate. That's my
yeah,
honest
I definitely agree with that. I also think it was political. It was about political gain. And I think both U.S. and Mexican officials made it about political gain. That's why AMLO was on TV every day saying, "Oh, don't invade me," this and that. It's all about gaining political
I mean, but
support.
it's gonna be like voted on. What do you think about it? Like, you
Well,
know,
I don't think it's gonna happen. I think the vote's gonna be struck down.
fair enough. What
like
do
I
you
said,
think?
I
Would you be in favor of it or not in
No, I
favor?
would
What
not
do
be
you?
in favor.
No, okay.
The U.S. has no place. I mean, I do definitely think the cartels
Well,
need
what
to.
about with like obviously it wouldn't be just the U.S. going randomly. It would be by discretion of the Mexican government.
Well,
But
yes,
the
but the
U.S.
Mexican
I
government
mean,
wouldn't
I
allow them.
wouldn't say the U.S. is incorruptible, but compared to like Mexican's government and military, it kind of is.
Yes, but
I
the
think that's
Mexican government
also
will not cooperate
also
with the U.S. They literally said they wouldn't.
What you literally what? Say again?
They said that they would not cooperate with the U.S. government.
I mean, AMLO may have said that, but if the bill goes through, they're gonna have to.
Well, yes, but what are they going to do? Invade Mexico? That's what their
No,
government
they're
is doing.
gonna. It's gonna be like Osama type or operations like that where they go after the capos. That's what I
Yeah,
see it as.
I
yes,
don't
but
really agree with that because I feel like that's kind of like projecting a military position on something that we don't even know if it's gonna pass or
yeah.
not.
And by the way, who is even a cartel member? Like,
Who's what?
who's even a cartel member? What do you think? Everybody just wears uniforms that just say, "Oh, I'm a cartel
No,
member."
I mean it wouldn't be. It would be like I said, Osama type operations where they go after the capos, which
Yes,
are
but Osama type
Listen, I
operations.
say Mexico, and I'm not even talking about AMLO here. I really don't think much of the guy personally. I think he's in it to play politics, but Mexico will
dude.
not permit America to go on its territory and continue an expansion of this pitiful war on drugs. Because honestly, I'm going to say this: America has lost many wars. They lost the Vietnam War, but they also lost the war on drugs. At this
Yes,
point,
they do.
it's Mexico. Mexico is the one that has to decide what it's going to do, how it's going to respond. And frankly, I think legalizing is probably a lot more effective than just having the U.S. Army do the hard
Legalizing
work
what
for
though?
us. And guess what? If America does do it, guess who's going to have to defray the cost of that of those expeditionary missions? Probably Mexico. Just like Trump
Wait,
said, "Oh, we're going to make Mexico
legalizing
pay for
what
the
though?
wall." They're going to do it.
But they didn't. They didn't end up paying for the wall.
They didn't end up paying for the wall, but I'm trying to say, if, think of it this way: if America goes into Mexico, what is stopping the Mexicans from saying no?
a bigger question would be this: would the American taxpayers fund it? Would people allow this to happen? Yeah, they may
I
vote for
mean,
it.
Now, if they do, then that would be an insipid act, and I tell you, most Hispanics would probably not be in support of that.
That's
yeah, I think
exactly what
it's
I'm
interesting
saying.
because there's. I don't know. I just want something to change the situation in Mexico because it seems very entrenched, and that might be something to. I mean, like it might do worse, but it might do better. I mean, I don't know.
Um,
Who
Listen,
knows?
I
I'm a person
I'm
who
not
really
gonna.
contests the legitimacy of just anyone who's like I contest AMLO's legitimacy. I really do not believe that AMLO really rules outside of Mexico City and Veracruz. I really don't believe he really rules because
Yeah,
honestly,
no, he doesn't.
he
Yeah,
doesn't. Yeah,
You think Mexico is more of a like the governors have more power? You think?
essentially, yeah. Like I really don't believe that AMLO does anything more than setting the agenda of the state.
Uh
I
huh.
mean, yeah, that's basically any Mexican president, though. That's not really just him.
I mean, that's
I
a fair
mean,
take.
I mean, to be fair, it's better that it be the governors than a bunch of warlords. I mean, that's what people always say, that how it's the cartels that have more power than the government. I think it's better that the governors have power.
I
What do you
mean,
think?
yeah. I mean, yeah, that would be good because like Yeah, I agree. Especially in a system like Mexico where there's so much corruption. Like, there can be two states right next to each other, like Querétaro and Guanajuato.
Guanajuato.
Querétaro is relatively safe, relatively not corrupt, and then Guanajuato is literally the opposite. And maybe that's a reflection of its different governors or the system under them. As opposed to like a federal government, if that it had complete and total power, the whole system would be corrupt. I mean, at least with the less centralized, you get corruption, but it's less centralized. At least in
Okay.
theory.
Now, what people were saying about the government, I'm going to go back to what I've always been telling my friends and acquaintances. I'm a monarchist. I think people say this, Mexican monarchist. I'm a monarchist. I fully support the House of Habsburg. Maximiliano was the best. It's probably going to be the best thing that happened to Mexico. If only he was in power today, it would have gone way more better.
Yeah,
I
and speaking of which,
fundamentally disagree, but
no, listen. Well, here's the thing. I have to. Well, I will publicly say here, I myself am not really much of a monarchist, but if I do have to support monarchy, I'd rather it be a constitutional monarchy. And I know that sounds like, oh, what's the difference? I think when it comes to Maximilian, and just to be clear, I'm talking about Maximilian the First, the Austrian Archduke who became Emperor of Mexico. Um, there's a lot of issues with people, just Mexicans in general, who half-heartedly study history. I'm not talking about you, by the way. I'm talking about in general, outside of you guys, who they talk about the French as being in terms like, and when I say like, I'm talking about the French as in Napoleon the Third. We're not talking about Bonaparte. If you guys see what I'm trying to say, Napoleon the Third was a totally different breed. I understand technically he descends from Napoleon Bonaparte, but they talk bad about him. Yeah, at the same time, some of them even praise the fact that they got Maximilian the First. I think the point that Mexican monarchist is trying to say, that he's trying to make, is that he would have scored legitimacy points for Mexico had he not been shot.
No, it's not what I'm saying. I'm saying Mexico will be in a better place had he stayed alive.
Well, yeah, that's
for 200
to
years.
some degree, yes. Like he would have been a good emperor, I guess. But I think what is more, we could definitely say with a more definite, like as a hypothesis, we could say that he would have won more legitimacy for Mexico, as in it being taken seriously by the West. Because at that time, it was all about being taken seriously. When you're taken seriously, then you can negotiate trade deals.
I
Then,
mean, trade back then was really. I mean, things were tariffed through the roof. I mean,
I know, but
international trade wasn't really
well,
much of a thing where
yeah,
it was big.
everything was tariffed through the roof. You're right, but
Sorry about
Mexico
that,
did
guys.
not really
I'm back.
have. The issue
No,
was
I
that
think
Mexico did not have anything which really it could really produce and tariff at the same time.
Oh yeah,
no, I
you're right. You're right.
no, I think it was more of that
That's a good point.
everything depended if the South won the Civil War in the U.S. And I think this went back to an early discussion me and Nick had that why is the U.S. so horrible, and we said that the South is the reason why because how they were the most expansionistic part of the U.S. Well, I think the survival of Mexico stems on can the U.S. be balkanized during the Civil War?
We could
Whoa,
have
whoa, whoa,
we could have
whoa,
taken
whoa,
this
whoa,
two
whoa.
ways, but I
Hey,
feel
we're
like
gonna post this. Calm down.
listen, I'll say this. I think with Mexico and Maximilian, there's a lot of people trying to like put in their what ifs on like what would have been. But if we're gonna talk about what we can say with the most absolute certainty, Maximilian would have what would have been his benefit to Mexico, not just the fact that he was there, but the fact that remember he was Austrian. So when I say everybody was basically like tariff wars and all that stuff, yes, you're right, but that was outside of America and Britain and the most industrialized creme of the crop. Nobody else was really doing that. It was a game of either people who had really high tariffs and high amounts of economic protectionism, and people with insanely low amounts of control on their economy. You see what I'm trying to say? That's
Mhm.
how it
Mhm.
was. It was a game of haves and have-nots. So when it comes to Emperor Maximilian, he could have put Mexico And remember, he was Austrian. So with that becomes, in a sense, it's kind of like saying monarchy or reinstating him would have won some points of legitimacy, because it's kind of like saying, why in the 15th century and centuries before did kings marry off their daughters and their sons to other kingdoms? Because it scored other political points for their country. Same thing with Mexico. It's really no different. I do think that Napoleon's intentions, I'm talking about Napoleon III, his intentions were not necessarily to make Mexico a French colony. And the Mexicans knew that, because the Mexican conservatives wouldn't have just blindly supported him and said, oh, vive la France. They wouldn't have said that.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
exactly.
I think it's more about Juarez also know that plan to try to take Mexico out of the U.S. orbit, and he was against it. We all know that Juarez was a U.S. puppet to the very extreme, right?
Well,
Mhm.
yeah, like I said, I don't believe wholeheartedly in monarchism. I do agree that these are the effects of instating a monarch from Europe in a country like Mexico. Those are like the prime reasons to actually support Maximilian. Like I said, he didn't really do much, but I mean, I think it was an opportune moment, and really, Mexico was missing out. Had they would have let him live, Mexico would have been fine.
I'm very much in favor of appointing a European prince from either Spain or from Austria, the Bourbons or the Habsburgs.
Nobody. Okay, Mexican monarchists. Like, you realize that.
I know
No,
this is my opinion. This is
okay.
my opinion.
Okay.
I'm
I like
pretty.
it. Nobody would want that. Like,
Okay, here's the thing: nobody would want that now, but you have to remember that nowadays we live in an era where people don't want to necessarily change the status quo.
I don't think even the majority of our audience would even want that.
Well, that's because our audience probably doesn't really have a conception of what that would look like.
Keep
It's
in mind,
okay.
though,
I'm not expecting
our
people to
audience is
have.
only introducing this idea to
No, this is all
really embrace
theoretical. I'm not saying I would ever want this to like happen in the modern day. I'm
well,
saying
you
if
see,
things were to remain
yeah,
constant
exactly.
and the liberals would not have shot him, then it would have been good for Mexico.
It
Now
would
it probably would not make a damn difference, because Europe is
state a monarchy now.
100% democracy.
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I
But
guess you could
Well,
say
back in
the
the day,
groundwork for monarchy to be better, but it wouldn't happen within 100 years.
yeah, like I said, monarchy is antiquated. All I'm saying is, just to finalize my point so everybody understands it the best that they can,
Hmm.
it would have been good back then.
Yes,
But
it
right
would.
now, no. Because I
Yeah.
think that
Fair
politically
enough.
aligning yourself with Europe is just better overall for your country, especially at that time.
Hmm.
I'm going to say this nowadays. How many of our viewers are either pro-democracy or pro-authoritarianism? That's going to be a good question later on.
Exactly, and I definitely think we could definitely make more discussions on that monarchy, democracy, and the democracy of certain countries. But as I said, this episode is just a basis of what we think, uh, to see what this thing is about.
Do any of you guys actually believe in democracy? That's a good question I'm going to ask.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
I definitely believe in democracy, um, but not in the way it's being run now.
That's
I'm
the
going to be
point
real
I
with you
want to
guys.
ask.
I believe to some degree, democracy it shouldn't be a one size fits all approach to certain countries. Secondly, it shouldn't be shoved down the throats of a country that traditionally cannot uphold the system. Also, I think that direct democracy should be tried wherever it could be. Like in a place like Puerto Rico, that could actually be a very good solution. And I proposed it before. I know, Nick, none of you have actually seen it, because that's actually in chapter 6 of what, of course. But
And as
uh,
someone who lives in a place that has limited direct democracy, especially compared to other parts of the country, I can tell you that it works so much better than simply electing legislators for everything.
exactly,
What? How
I
much do you
think
want to? How much do
the
you want
issue
to
with
live in democracy?
republics is that republics tend to attract always the higher classes,
Mhm.
and the higher classes are the ones
Yeah,
that always
well,
get
bourgeois
their will put
republics.
in. Essentially, yeah, like it gets their will gets to get put in place before the will of the people. Because if you think
Yeah,
about it, the odds are
that was
mathematically stacked against the average person. And think about it, all those competing interests, you have people at the bottom level, people striking, people who are just workers who probably don't have a skill, and you have all those
here's
competing
a
interests. And then you have interests that want to pay you money to put their proposal in effect.
here's a little
Exactly.
here's a little history lesson for you guys. That was how republics were run back then. It was just a club for the elites. The good example is always during Italy, the medieval age, where it was the Republic La Serenissima of Genoa, Venice, and what was the other one? I think Florence. It was always these closed off elite groups that voted for each other.
Yeah, basically, kind of like in Russia with the boyars.
Oh, you mean
Mhm.
the Republic God?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Direct democracy
I
definitely
to ask
needs to
this.
be put in place. As I said, I actually have a really great example how direct democracy works. So here in California, we have a direct democracy system in which
Nick, I need
every
to.
election has propositions, and people can individually vote on those laws instead of those being put in the legislature. Uh,
Honestly,
I,
my idea of what direct democracy should look like, I believe that we need to have direct democracy for two reasons. And again, I know I've been referring to Puerto Rico a lot so much, but I'm just going to refer to it one last time.
mhm.
Puerto Rico has an issue with voter apathy, partially because Puerto Rico has been through quite a lot. Okay, it's had its education system. We already talked about that, and we had the Hayuya uprising. We know
Mhm.
how that went. The Nationalist Party essentially, their leaders got imprisoned. Some of them were tortured, subject to lethal radiation, and then, of course, decades later, um, that movement was crushed. Then we had the FALN terrorists. They were arrested. Independence was like firmly like it dropped like 1% support. So
Exactly.
now
taboo.
you have to remember that
Basically,
when you
basically
have
became taboo.
what do you mean?
Talking about independence became taboo in Puerto Rico.
Well, yeah, essentially, yeah, like it was taboo because you had the Americans coming in and saying, "Well, okay, this is something that um, it goes
Communists
against the
want.
Constitution." Like just making up a bunch of rules. Like for example, there was a gag law in the 30s. You couldn't wave a Puerto Rican flag outside of your house, which was kind of sad, honestly. Like just imagine if you couldn't imagine if there was a law in America or in California where you couldn't have a Mexican flag outside of your house.
Mhm.
Just imagine that, And like I said, I'm just gonna wrap it up and make my point. Voter apathy is one of the issues that Puerto Rico faces. Like even now, one, you have immigration. Two, you have immigration of Anglo investors, and three, you have people not voting. What does that tell you? Like, I mean, I think the best way to solve that is first you have to make sure the economy is working. Second, my vision for direct democracy is I'm sure you guys have seen that Greek painting of like some dude on a stool or whatever, and a bunch of people voting. That's what I imagine. That's what I imagined. I want to see a real public assembly. That's what I want to see. That's
Exactly,
the
and
hallmark of a
I believe,
civilized direct democracy.
yeah,
I said I want to ask this question to Nick. How much do you, and I guess now to paper, how much do you want to limit democracy to municipalities or to strictly to people and communities?
Communities.
communities. I definitely
I'll
believe
tell you why communities
in
are
the
better.
most local rule possible.
Actually, you guys can go before me. Actually, I want to see what you guys have to say.
Yeah, I believe in the most local rule possible. I definitely believe in municipalities and individual communities. I believe those laws should overtake any type of federal law or any type of uh, worldwide law.
Exactly, precisely, because and I'll add on to it. Like conceptually, what's going on right now is we in America we have the federalist system where the federal government is above everything. Then you have the states, and you have then you have like the municipalities, counties, and then the municipalities. My issue with that is that, um, in a sense, there's efforts to centralize at every echelon, and that's kind of the issue.
Mhm.
I feel like one that don't you think that that alone is a strain um on the people's I'm going to say it this way, on the government's funds? Just the fact that you have to pay for all that bureaucracy
Mhm.
when you could just have a better direct democracy. Like, why
Exactly.
would you have to pay for all that? Secondly, it would be better. Like, I'm going to give a better example would be I'm just going to say we'll say like Hawaii or something. That's a good example of how a direct democracy can run pretty efficiently. Regardless of the people that live there, you could have a functioning direct democracy, just community by community. Like for example, what you see on the map, like if you look at Google Maps or whatever, every single 3 or 4 small towns, that's a community right there. To me, at least,
Mhm.
a community should correspond with how people feel in a certain region, a certain activities, institutions that operate there. That to me is a community, not
I agree.
like fucking what 70 miles of land. To me, that's not a community. I'm gonna be real with you.
Mhm. Yeah, I
My
mean,
idea. I think I made
Oh,
my.
you guys want to wrap up?
yeah, I think we should.
It's kind of getting long.
Yeah. Definitely. I think that sums up what we think. That sums up our podcast. Basically, the whole idea of the podcast is to go from the smallest issues of the Hispanic community, such as crime, uh, or whatever have you, individual stuff, to things that have been going on for decades. Um, Basically, just a wide variety of topics concerning the Hispanic community. That's what our podcast is about. And this concludes our first episode. Thank you.
Hit the